Hi, everybody. This is Kevin Sabrin with Rethinking Everything and the Rethinking Dad blog. I have a special guest with me today, Marie Goodwin. Hi, Marie.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. It's a beautiful day outside. I'm really enjoying the summer.
Here in Florida as well. Really a treat to have you online today, and for our guests, the Rethinking audience as well. We haven't had a chance to get to know you previously. This is going to be your first Rethinking Everything here in 2015.
It is. You've actually been in my thoughts, though. I have, ever since I started this unschooling journey, I was aware of the conference, and every year I kept thinking, is this the year that I'm going to drive out there to that conference? Right. And this year seems to be the year.
Well, we brought it a little closer, and this will be our 19th year now. I believe we're the oldest unschooling conference in the country. There was one that I know of that preceded RE, and I don't know if it's still around, but it's definitely one of the oldest. We moved it from Dallas to Little Rock, at least for the last year and this year. So we brought it towards you a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Not quite as far as Dallas for you. I'm trying to make it easy. So you've been unschooling for how long?
Since forever, forever with my kids. I have a 13-year-old and a almost 10-year-old. Mm-hmm. And the idea that we would not send our kids to school was pretty foundational to the way we wanted to parent. And as a matter of fact, I became really convinced that that was the case in literally holding my son for the first time, looking at his face. I was like, I just know that this is what I want to do. And I actually called, we have a homeschooling cooperative near here called Open Connections. And I called the leadership and talked to the director 6 weeks into having a baby and discussed the idea with him. And he said, well, this all sounds great, Marie. So why don't you bring Eli in and come in and we'll, talk and we can get to know him a little. He's like, how old is he? And when I told him, he laughed at me and reminded me for years of that. So I've been unschooling since the beginning.
Well, high marks for proactivity. I don't believe Kelly and I came to it quite that early, but it was same with us. It was a very natural progression from what we were already doing. We reflected deeply on everything from wedding vows to, childbirth and immunizations and on and on. So it was a very natural progression for us also. Just didn't really seem dawn on us that it was necessary for school. Sounds like you had a similar path. So
I did. I really had a similar path.
Sorry, Rethinking was on the radar early days. When did you first hear about it? I'm curious.
I don't know exactly, but I can remember thinking that my daughter was just too young to be in a car seat that long. So it was a long time ago, probably 2006 or 2007.
Yeah.
And, my kids are great travelers, but I was trying to limit 2-day long journeys like that. But now they're great travelers and they enjoy being in the car. We're going to make this conference sort of part of a larger month-long journey out west. We're gonna see Cahokia on our way to unthinking and rethinking everything, and then on out to Taos and to Mesa Verde and to visit some other sites in Colorado.
Well, we're doing similar. We're going to have 3 months on the road this year, and I can think of 4 other families that are doing something very similar between 1 and 3 months. Actually, 4 other families. So it's a big part of this journey. It's all in a way a pilgrimage for those that go there regularly. But what a neat opportunity for you and your family. The reason I asked you the question was I'm always curious, especially from somebody who's new to the conference, what the impression is, because 19 years ago, actually like 23 years ago when it started, Barb Lundgren took a few-year hiatus way back. But so like 23 years ago or whenever it started, it was Rethinking Education. And it was very much an unschool focus. And while we're still largely an unschool conference, it's really almost impossible to rethink education this long and not have it, seep into all the different facets of life. So we have to be rethinking everything.
Yeah, no, it's all interconnected. And, this kind of deep level systems change doesn't occur in just one particular part of our culture. We have to go much deeper, and that requires reevaluating things at a level that's going to impact not only education, but our economic system, the way that we interact with our healthcare systems, the way we interact and think about government and bureaucracy. I mean, at a very base level, food, all of this has to be really thought through. And the irony is that at a very deep level, it's all connected. And the reasons, the things that we're seeking about it are all connected to each other. So it's interesting how people start down one path, say education, and find themselves questioning everything. And I really firmly believe there's a reason for that.
Right.
We're sensing that there's something wrong, deep, very deep. So.
Yeah, that's a common theme. We hear about it a lot at RE, and of course you work very closely with it on the home front there. You're working closely with Charles Eisenstein, and there's a lot of conversation about the space between the stories and new and old paradigm. I think we refer to you often as the external hard drive with Charles. Can you tell me a little bit about that? The new paradigm? Or
I've been working with Charles. Yeah, in the work that I've been doing with Charles, it's just sort of a culmination with work that I had been doing inside really for a really, really long time. And when I read Charles's work about story change and deep level a story shift in our culture, things began to make a lot of sense about why I kept, questioning all of these cultural paradigms that we're engaged in and why I felt they were lacking. And Charles's work is all about that. Like, what are the deeper connections? And so when I read his work, long before I knew him, I felt, this is it. It actually, the books explained myself to me. And I felt a deep sense of gratitude about that. So when he and I were introduced by mutual friends to the opportunity to be able to work with him and help him deliver this message around the world, really, he travels all over, has been one of the really remarkable opportunities and, gifts in my adult life, I have to say.
You mentioned gratitude and gift. And of course, I think of that. I think of you and Charles when I think of those two words. So tell me about the gift environment and gifting and gratitude as it relates to gifting, how that all works.
Well, so one of the deep core interests has been building community. So, when I left graduate school, all of my friends were academics, and I left graduate school with 2 children and no friends anymore. All my friends were off excavating and doing work in the field and didn't have children. And I began to really feel lonely. And I looked around, and I don't have family nearby to help me raise my children. And I thought, I need to build community. Like, we really have no community around us, And so it became a very deep level drive. And I think a lot of new parents have that. Their lives changed really dramatically with the birth of these babies. And they think, I have to make some new friends and build community, and we have to raise kids together. And through this drive to build community, I learned a lot about what really makes people connected to each other. And it's not about going out and buying things together and co-consuming. Like, a lot of people think like, oh, we're going to go out to the movies and eat popcorn together and then go out to dinner and then come home. And while that can build some intimacy through conversation, what really builds community is over and over and over again, giving of yourself, being generous, creating a network of generosity with the people around you. And that can be it can actually be on the internet. There are gifting platforms that are, for people who may never meet each other in person. And we're lucky to live at a time where those sorts of connections happen. But true community is built by these everyday acts of generosity. And I really began to see that happening in my community. And so I joined my transition town, which is a group of people who really want to build community to help establish resilience on a local level. Mm-hmm. They're very interested in these things like climate change and the economic instability that we're seeing and resource depletion. And they say, you know, there are changes coming, and we have to be a real community of people who knows each other well enough to know how to get our needs met. And so within this framework, my interest primarily was in gifting and how gifting impacts community building. And I started a time bank, which is an hour-based currency system where people trade their skills and gifts and then get their needs met with other skills and gifts in a hour for hour system. And then I started a free store, which is basically a Goodwill, but everything's free. And people come in and take what they need and give what they aren't using anymore. And both have been very successful. So those are my two initiatives. But what drives our transition town is really this idea that gifting and giving of yourself and giving visibly in your community and being seen as a giver is one of these ways that we can really impact people around us and build relationship.
Wow, that really hits home. I get that. The gratitude part of that question is very clear. I understand how that works, and actually at the same time, I'm very excited to hear more about it. I took a look around on the Transition Town site, and I was just kind of snooping around through Yardens and some reskilling were the two things that really caught me. Community garden?
Yeah.
Garden.
Yardens are, yes, neighbors helping each other form gardens. So there are lots of people who have land that don't know how to grow tomatoes, and tons of people who live in apartments who grew up on farms and have a lot of skills to pass, between them. And so it's a way of meshing people together, helping connect people who might not otherwise know each other.
It never ceases to amaze me. We live in an RV in a campground much of the year as we travel around. We're full-timers in an RV. And, so we've been through a number of different parks and state properties, and, you never quite know who your neighbor is going to be. And there's a lot of times you need to borrow that odd tool that, if you live in an RV, you need a lot of tools, the odd tool that, I don't have. And, everybody's pretty friendly in this environment, and, you can ask, and if they have it, you pretty much be able to get it. And yet at the same time, I remember I started living in a community on a city street and not really thinking about asking the neighbor next door. Right. So unusual what fences and property lines do to us sometimes.
It really is. It's really, it's unfortunate in a way. And people are lonely, sitting inside their little boxes, and we all sense that there's something really wrong with it. And it also makes, the sad, unfortunate byproduct of that is that we don't feel safe. Well, it's a fine line for unschoolers. Like I feel safe sending my kids out, but other people perceive children walking alone as unsafe, and then we'll call the police on you. And so there's this feeling that we aren't safe in our own communities, even though statistically we're far more safe. Our children are far more safe than they were 30 years ago when we were growing up.
Right.
But that breakdown of community has created the autonomy that we all feel has created this sense of fear. And really that's what transition is trying to address is fear. Really, as activists, fear it cuts your legs off from underneath you. And if you're building community and you know that in an emergency you can get your needs met, a lot of that fear goes away, Yeah,
it's very tribe-like. And, we think of these things a lot. And we incorporated the word tribe into last year's conference description because, in the sense that we have common interest, shared interest, fundamental beliefs or common ideals, in that essence, we're tribe-like. What we don't really have in the unschooling environment is that lineage or handing down of stories from generations past. It's almost like there's this kind of broken story because we deviated some 30 years ago, I guess is when we started calling it unschooling. And now we're in this place where are we unschooling? Are we whole schooling? Are we real schooling? Are we world schooling? Are we radical unschooling? There's subsets of subsets. And I don't know that that's important until you start at the bottom and say we're self-designing, right? So we've stepped out of the conventional norm or the cultural norm and started over with something that feels better to us. Kind of worry about labels later. So it's interesting how tribe develops. You talked about tribe online. You talked about Transition Town, potentially tribe. we create a conference for 5 days every year that's tribe-like that may not see each other again for the rest of the year. So as you bounce around the world doing these different conferences or retreats, where is it working? Where do people get it? Where is a clear example of how tribe can function in the new story?
Well, I was just at a conference in Rome called Giftival, and it was basically 50 people who are doing gift economics in their communities at a local level. And you might think that that must be a small number. There's actually quite a large number of people doing this work, and these people were the people that could gather, and they gathered from all over the world. And in that place where everybody knew the purpose of being there was to explore gifting with each other, mm-hmm. and to support each other, and to solidify the tribe. There wasn't really a set schedule, and it's kind of makes me think of Rethinking's open space. This year we actually utilized open space for that as well. Basically everybody knew that they were coming and that they were going to gift something to the community and then be given in return, and then meet all of these people, some of whom we didn't know each other. I knew a few people, but I didn't know everybody, and that was the same for everybody there. But we all had this baseline of understanding. And I think that those kinds of gatherings, while they may be speaking, to the converted, I actually think that, or preaching to the choir, that kind of gathering of a choir is really important, because it helps remind you that you're really not crazy. Yeah. There are people everywhere doing this work, and Rethinking is one of those gatherings where, alone in our homes and our communities, some communities don't have a lot of unschoolers. You may begin to think like, oh my God, I am swimming uphill. I'm swimming upstream. I'm like, I'm not, I don't have a tribe. But to remind yourself that you actually do have a tribe is really, really important to continue the quest,
Yeah, that's a great point. We have, naturally every year we have newbies that come in, and sometimes they're dipping a toe in and testing the water. Like maybe they're on the fence of, do I really want to unschool, or I have one child unschooling and maybe another not, and have I somehow failed at unschooling, or what, and then there's others that have evolved out of education and into other facets of their life. And so there's different levels of learning, there's different levels of needs. We have folks that have adult children with kids of their own, who are coming back in their late 20s or early 30s, and they're there for community, and they're there to remind, they're also there to gift and and gesture, and be available, whether it's a mentor or a seasoned, mature capacity, just help somebody through the mud. It's really a neat celebration. And so I do see tribe developing, and we're at the early stages of the story continuing through the generations now. Right. Conscious parenting pre-existed, but unschooling did not. And as these two things come together, we can kind of continue the story as, conscious parenting, unschooling.
Right. Well, they're inextricably linked, I think. I mean, you really have to, they're two parts of the same hand, like I don't know that you can, I guess you could have one without the other, but I have never met anybody that was not aware or practicing both, or trying to practice and learn more about both. So that's really interesting. I mean, and other things that aren't working, like I've really looked at I've been to some conferences that held a lot of promise, like they were, these big ideas, and everybody was gathering from around the world for these big ideas. But when people were gathering to be in service to something other than the story change, but they were gathering in service to sort of ego, or who were the important speakers, and serving the speakers and serving the stars, instead of the idea, that then the conferences end up, there can be fighting, there can be factions breaking up, and people, there was one where people were actually yelling at each other on stage, and I think when people arrive at a conference, or arrive in a community, and are deeply in service to the ideas that the community represents, and not to their own, stardom, that's what really works, is being in service. And that's what being in the gift actually really is. That's just another word for like gifting, is being in service to these larger ideas. So I've seen both what works and what doesn't work.
That's good. Those are important benchmarks. And I'd love to hear more about that at the conference too. One of our good friends of RE, Scott Noel, a fellow presenter, is we've talked about this recently in a conversation. We were talking about being in service, and we were having a side discussion about what feels good as we reinvent ourselves and move into the new me or the new Scott or whatever. And in service to others while having fun were two things that we share in common. They were just things that we kind of agreed on through the course of this conversation. And it's been a bit of a mantra for me as I go back and ask myself, does a certain task pass the litmus test? And really, is it in service to others and am I having fun? Because if I'm on mark with those two things, I'm nailing the sweet spot for me, for my personality makeup, for what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So
I would 100% agree with that. That's a good mantra to have.
So when it's not fun, I need to take a break and do something that is fun, and then come back to it. See if
sometimes the things that were really fun stop being so fun. And it may be just temporary. It may be because of overload. There are lots of fun things to do, and you can easily overload yourself with commitments and that seemed really great, and then you get bogged down in the details and stuff. And I've had to trim some things that I used to feel were a lot of fun and really rewarding, not because I don't think they're fun anymore, that I just feel overloaded and I'm beginning to resent having to do them. And if I'm in that space, I just have to say, okay, I'm going to take a break for a while.
Well, one of our other speakers and co-presenter for you is Melissa Rivera. Talks a lot about body wisdom and emotional intelligence and intuition, and kind of reading the body cues. And the more I listen to Melissa and her brilliance, I am understanding things more clearly now about how to actually notice when things aren't fun. There's the cognitive, but then there's reading the body cues, like anxiety in the middle of the night, waking up, or, an unsettled stomach after a certain experience. And some of the lesser obvious ones that kind of tell you what you're really feeling at a deep level. Melissa's going to be talking about sacred feminine this year and leading up a discussion on that, while Charles heads up the sacred masculine. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that, because, what does fun actually mean? And does it always have to be fun? And you ride the roller coaster and have some ups and downs and still be okay. So lots of
questions. I can't wait to attend Melissa's stuff. I'm really excited for it. So it's one of my key moments of being there. So
absolutely, she's brilliant. There's a lot of good stuff coming out of that. So lots of really neat sessions this year. Some of the sessions I'm particularly interested in have to do with what I'm really actively involved in on the home front is I'm trying to have fun and feel creative, express my creativity, and have an outlet and balance this work-life balance thing. And ideally have it not feel like work, have it be fun, right? So earning a living, what is the need for money and currency, and how does gift and trade and barter fit into all that? And, how do I express my creativity and this desire to create and make it all work in some kind of homogenous fashion? It's,
right.
So we have another speaker, John Strelecki, and some others who are going to be talking about that too. And Charles is going to touch on it. You're going to touch on it. So that's kind of like my takeaway nugget that I'm looking for this year. So,
it's holding that balance.
Right. You mentioned open space earlier, and I'm sure you recall an early conversation that you had with me where you actually threw that into the mix and kind of gave us a name for it. Kelly and I were talking about this collaborative environment, right, where we could have the audience more actively participate and yet create a framework so we could still talk about the big nuggets we wanted to talk about. And you brought open space.
Right.
Thank goodness, because now we have a name for it.
Yeah, when we were talking and what you were describing, I was like, he's talking about open space technology. That's exactly what he's talking about. So I'm glad that I could give you a framework, because it's a really effective framework for large groups of people to co-collaborate together and make it so that there isn't sort of there are talking heads at the top of a room and everybody sits and listens to them, and then you break for lunch. And then, it's like, that can be really, especially after days and days of it, it really is, it's just really the old way of doing things. And there's so much wisdom in the room. Right. And to be able to honor and hold that and allow people to give back, to offer their wisdom, cuts down on, say, people standing up to ask a question and then going on a monologue for 10 minutes or those, because that's what the impulse behind that is that they want to give of their wisdom, and there's no place for it to come out in the structure. So this is the way it works.
20 years of corporate America. I can't tell you how many meetings I sat through or attended, and in some cases even planned, embarrassed to say, that, where we just didn't create enough white space for the participants to interact and have their needs met. So really excited about it this year. There've been a couple of times where, we look at the calendar and we say, ooh, it looks a little lighter than in years past, but we know the good stuff that's in there.
Yeah.
We have the right people, the right topics, not that there's a wrong, but we know the people who are going to be in the room, and we know the topics that are going to be discussed, and we can only anticipate the magic that's going to happen. So,
right. And any space that exists is going to be filled very quickly with, collaboration and energy. And yeah, I don't think you have to worry at all. It sounds wonderful. I can't wait.
Yeah. Well, after 18 years of magic, we know that, the magic's going to happen. Just going into it with a little trepidation but we're excited. We're handling it. You mentioned graduate school, and you're talking about excavating. So I assume there is an archaeology.
Yes, I did. I'm 3 chapters short of a PhD in classical and Near Eastern archaeology, and I won't be finishing. And I just basically got to the point while writing my dissertation, which was on archaeoastronomy, Bronze Age Aegean archaeoastronomy, so very specific. Wow. That I just wasn't interested anymore in being an academic. I had both my children and had committed myself to this unschooling path, and I began looking at myself being trained to be a professor. And there aren't really that many jobs in what I would teach anyway. And I just began to really go, is it worth, more, is it worth writing and finishing and spending a year more on this while my children are little for something that you don't even really believe in anymore anyway? And the answer was no. So instead of investing one more minute into it, I just stopped the process. But that doesn't mean that the skills and the knowledge that I gained from being in graduate school haven't been useful. In fact, they have been extraordinarily useful for all of my life. I can read statistics. I had to do work in statistics. I know how to look at research structure and see the gaps in the way that research is created. I can read academic writing, and it has come in very, very handy. But I haven't excavated in a long time. It's been, last time was 2001, right before I got back, right before 9/11, like 2 days before 9/11 from my last excavation. So.
Well, interesting. Thinking about that, what that world would have looked like, excavating and finding clues into past lives and chapters and stories based on, physical, tangible proof that you can kind of discern from how people lived,
right,
and how they interacted. And yet, most of the time, you're spending almost all your entire time now with people in the current story,
right,
talking more about where we're going as a society.
Right. And I mean, that was also a realization in graduate school. I just realized that, essentially all archaeology is it's make-believe. We don't really have the complete picture. We'll never have the complete picture. We have spotty evidence at best for what would have existed, and we have to tell the story at a very high level. Like, there were people here, and they cooked, these animals, and they made these things as a way to barter and trade or whatever. But we don't have their stories, and we don't know them as people, and it's very rare. Because I was working in prehistory, right? So there's no written record. Well, there is, but it hasn't been translated. That you don't know the people's stories, and I began to realize that that is less important to me right now, at this time in the world where there's so much going on and there's so much of critical importance, we're sitting at this juncture, a really important juncture in history, that work has to be primary, especially because I have now 2 children who will live, in the future that we're creating right now. And so that became the much more of my primary work.
So last year at the conference, Dr. Shefali talked about, the kind of the dark side or the shadow self, that which is contrast to happiness, for example. And I've been really reflecting on this a lot lately about what is the importance of contrast. So do I have to, how much pain do I have to experience to receive joy and to fully appreciate joy? And then how much is pain or discomfort, or it's not always that dark, but just darkness or shadow self, if you will. How much of that is important to really self-actualize? And, do I need these constant reminders or pokes in the shoulder or whatever? And you've mentioned this a few times about sort of where we're at in the world with sort of major things kind of colliding or happening simultaneously. How much discomfort does society at large require to make the necessary shifts to get to a healthier place?
Yeah. It's an ongoing discussion I've had with many people. Personally, I feel that the discomfort has to be what we in the first world would consider fairly catastrophic. While people who have lived traditional lives would still just be, same old, but I think that the way of life, the resource depletion of 1.7 globes that we here in the West waste every year, and the 50% of food that we waste, and the extraction of exhaustible resources to build things like cell phones and computers, which I'm using right here. It's really just interwoven, this kind of consumption, into our society. And I think that unless we radically power down on the consumption in the global north, we're in for a really big shock. And I think that is what is going to wake people up, because so many people just deny that it's there. I think it has to be undeniably in their face. And 2008, with the financial crisis, came close. It really did come close. And but people sort of were lulled back to sleep again. The banks were saved, and the ATM stayed open, and we just continued on. And we're able to tell ourselves, well, we're just, in a downturn, it'll get better, Yeah. But I'm not convinced that people will in the global north will wake up until something fairly catastrophic happens.
Well, if the global north, as you deem it, is running the fastest with the most technology and the fastest depletion of resources, if they happen to be the example that the rest of the world needs to see to run head on into a brick wall at the end of a cul-de-sac at 100 miles an hour, then, it probably will be better understood by those that are in less egregious situations.
Yeah. Yep. And it's a really horrible thing to contemplate, especially when you have kids and you're thinking like, well, how can I prepare? But frankly, we don't know what's coming down the pike. We don't know when it will happen, how it will happen, what it will look like. And so there's there's no real way to prepare other than building community, reskilling. You mentioned the reskilling from transition, and that's what transition is doing, is saying, instead of running around in fear and panic and waking up in the middle of the night and sweating, bullets because you're so worried about global collapse, acknowledge that there are problems, and then work to actively implement systems of solution, not just like a solution here, a solution there, but actual systems that will hold your local community up when things start happening. And that feels really, really, really empowering. And I've seen, we have hundreds of members in our transition town. We're a town of about 7,000 people, and we have 900 members. And 50 active people on our steering committee, and people come to our our gatherings and our events, hundreds of people sometimes. And so in this little town, there is an awareness, and people are really working to make this happen. And it can happen in any community. It's happening all over the world. And that's why transition is such a powerful model for a local town to follow. And that's something that I really want to talk about and introduce at Rethinking, so that people can see that it's not sort of like this big scary thing you have to follow. It's just this idea about how to sort of galvanize work in your community and create community while doing it.
So, I guess I've been to like 5 REs now. And one thing I've heard about it, almost everyone, is sustainable communities.
Mm-hmm.
Eco communities, intentional communities, some derivative therein. And a lot of talk, but I have not seen many come to fruition. And the stories I heard in those discussions were, moderately successful endeavors around the globe, where you have some well-intended people, but it doesn't seem like by and large they're thriving. And I'd love to hear that somebody disproved that. And I'd love to hear that, that there's some winners out there that feel like they're accomplishing what they set out to. The reason I bring it up is Transition Town seems to me, from what I understand about it, to have some uniqueness that maybe would help the sustainable or the eco groups. Maybe you need more in common than environmental.
Right.
There has to be an economy for things to function.
Right.
To be able to trade with people or sell, people, for example. Is there like a big 3 things that are just absolute musts, or a big 5 in successful communities like that?
Successful transition towns, you definitely need, a good, strong, active steering committee, right, of people who are really, committed to the work, at least for a period of time. And they rotate. There's no there's no real leader. We had to set up some leadership to get 501c3 status, but the leadership is sort of unofficial in the way that it works within the community. So I think that you need to have, a good solid base of people who are interested in the ideas, and you can raise that awareness by, showing films and having book groups and bringing people together for potlucks and talking about it. And that sort of awareness raising is part of it. So there's that. Transition towns tend to work better when the towns are smaller. So there was a Transition Philadelphia, but it ended up falling apart because people were driving from all over Philadelphia to attend meetings, and it was too big of a space to contemplate doing real projects that would have an impact. So they broke into neighborhoods, and people are now even breaking down into streets. There's a thing called transition streets, where you just concentrate on your immediate neighbors and really look about how you can cooperate and build resilience just within your neighborhood. So having a central place is very helpful. I think it's also really helpful to have some farmland around, or an active permaculture group that is doing urban permaculture. There are active transition groups in New York City and in larger cities that are doing, rooftop gardening and vacant lot gardening. But you have to have access to some form of local food, because transition really does focus a lot on trying to give everybody access to local foods, and building the awareness that we don't need to ship, spinach from China. So you can eat locally, and it's not as hard as people think it is. I would say those are the top 3.
Okay. So the parochial component of focusing on what's closest to home makes a lot of sense to me. I think the natural evolution, when I was in Australia, I remembered hearing about the average size of the Aboriginal folks, would get to a certain size and almost split off. In Costa Rica, we heard about, or Peru, we heard about Lake Titicaca, and sort of how certain tribes or bands would stay together till a certain size and then split off. And, that sort of plays itself out in nature time after time. So that seems logical. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Well, we're definitely looking forward to hearing a lot more about that at RE this year. I wanted to shift for a minute, because there's one area I don't think I know all that well. I understand what we wrote and talked about. The gift of the Sacred Heart.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work?
Well, the first thing that we have to do is alert everybody and make sure that people know that this is happening. And how it works is that at the beginning of the event, not at the very beginning, but on the first day of the event, there'll be tables set up and some cards for people to write stories on. And people are to place gifts, things that they no longer have a use for, but that hold some special meaning for them. So it's not like a swap and trade table or something that, like, you know, you don't really care about that much and you just are going to give away. So something that actually has meaning to you, but you just aren't using it anymore. To bring that, write the story about why it has meaning to you and put it on the table. And I think because our group is so big that we're going to actually have bags so that we can pull them out like a paper bag raffle, because there may be a lot of people wanting the same thing. And you'll have a couple of days to look over the items and request some things. And then I'm thinking on Sunday, maybe Monday morning, I don't know, like towards the end of the conference, then we'll announce the winners of each item. And then you're to meet with the person whose item it is. If you've received an item, the item it is, and you meet with them and hear the story and talk about it. And the thinking is that gifting, especially in a group of people who are essentially strangers. I mean, a lot of people already know each other, but essentially it's a tribe built of people who aren't intimates. It's an attempt to build intimacy between two people and have there be a physical object that bears that relationship.
Nice.
And it's then something you can take home and you have a memory attached to it. And that's the heart of gifting. That's the essence of gifting, is that when you gift within community, these things have meaning. They aren't just things you bought at Target and got on sale.
Right.
It's something that meant something to somebody you know, and that then becomes more priceless for you owning it.
Wow.
And then you can pass it on with love later. So that, I think, is the heart of what gifting is.
That sounds great. The heart.
Yeah.
Gift of the Sacred Heart. Well,
yeah.
You're going to be busy at RE this week. We've got a lot of things scheduled for you. We'll try our best not to wear you out, but I have a sense we're going to not be able to hold you back from diving in. You're really actively engaged, and I love that. Thank you.
I'm really excited to be there.
On reskilling. So my wife Kelly has had this idea for a while, close to home, that there's folks with skills and folks that are in transition and maybe needing some guidance or would potentially apprentice. How does reskilling work?
In our community, we do it through the time bank. So our time bank, I explained that a little bit before. It's an hour-to-hour system where you give an hour of your time, and then you can call on an hour of somebody else's time later. And it's an online system of credits, basically, time credits. And in the reskilling in our community, people identify skills that they have. Say, I love making kimchi. And so when I make a new batch of kimchi, and I make it at like 10 gallons at a time, like I make these huge batches of kimchi. So, but when I make it, then I bring people in and I show them how to prepare kimchi. It's very simple, but you need some very specific things. And I teach them that skill, and then they can go home and utilize it. And in the time bank, I'm given, say that class takes me 4 hours, I'm given 4 time credits. But the way our transition town works is we actually allocate 4 time credits to every person who comes. They don't have to give credits because we believe that our community is better for 5 people knowing how to make kimchi rather than just the one.
Sure.
So we want to reward people for reskilling.
Right.
And in this way, you can learn skills like gardening and canning and knitting and weaving. And these are all things that we have in ours, even basic skills like cooking. You'd be really surprised how few people know. There are people who don't know how to cook. And we can have older generations teach younger generations. And it's just a way to build resilience in the community. So
I love it. I think that's brilliant. My kids go to a co-op, and we have often thought how wonderful it would be if our retirement age folks were available to share with the youths, the lessons learned from a different time.
Yeah.
Some of those
Yeah.
things that are maybe lesser appreciated, but still valuable or vital, maybe. But we're starting to lose them, or at least lose the texture and the richness of those things. So that's something we'd like to participate in at some point.
Yeah, it's sadly we have become a culture that's de-skilled. I mean, my grandfather and grandmother had, a large kitchen garden, knew how to can, made everything from scratch, made their own clothes, knitted. I mean, they knew they had these skills. But my parents' generation and generations following it basically said, not interested in that, and because that generation, the generations that have been doing these things since the beginning of agriculture, they've been doing these things we're losing vital skills, and we're becoming dependent on a market economy that has disrupted the passing down from, grandparent to grandchild, parent to child. We've just given over that power to this economy that provides everything to us. And we're much poorer for it, I think.
There's your international travel is something that sticks in my mind every time we go to Costa Rica, and we go there fairly regularly. Costa Rica has no armed forces in the country, and they haven't since, don't quote me the year, but it's 1973 or something like that. And yet they have a phenomenal literacy rate because they invest in schools in like virtually every small town has a school, one-room schoolhouse even, and a soccer field, of course. And
of course.
I just find that interesting. And, as proponent of unschooling, I'm neutral. Schools are schools, and they're fine for some and necessary wherever they're necessary. But I have no affinity myself to sign up for one.
Right.
And yet, it's hard to argue with the success rate if you want to measure literacy, and by divesting themselves of armed forces. They're a peaceful nation. They don't seem to have a lot of problems. They don't stick their nose in other people's business for the most part. So they can get by without an armed forces, and they have tremendous literacy. Do you see other examples of sort of nations succeeding or sort of living harmoniously and doing things that work?
Yeah, the one that jumps to my mind is Bhutan, and Bhutan has a commitment to a gross. They have a stated commitment to gross national happiness. So they don't do GDP. They do GNH, and this is the thing. Like you can Google GNH and Bhutan will come up. But hold on one second. I'm going to plug in my computer. It's about to die. So Bhutan has an incredibly rich and beautiful culture that is intact, right? So and they actively protect it, and they don't allow very many tourists in. They have 70% of their country is still virgin forests, and they have a high literacy rate, but the literacy is always embedded within the culture and the community. So, literacy, of course, in and of itself is not a bad thing or a good thing necessarily. But what happens in other countries where there is a really high emphasis on Western-style educational systems that are imposed onto cultures that do not function like that, is that the children are psychologically and socially removed from their communities and taught that their communities are inferior and that they have to learn in this Western way. But what happens is that they then have to come back to their communities, and then they can't function inside the communities anymore.
Right.
And so basically you're setting up people to, can they compete on the world market? Well, a certain percentage of them can, but most of them can't, and they go back to their communities, and all they can do is read and do some math, and maybe they can teach other kids to do that, but they don't know how to harvest grain. They don't know how to participate in the life of their community anymore. And so as long as these cultures are really using, say, literacy, but functioning within the community and helping children to be functional parts of their community, then that's fine. But so many countries, especially, I mean, all over the world. I mean, we traveled in Asia, 10 countries in a year and a half. And except for Bhutan, what we were seeing is Western style education, which was stripping children of their relational ability to their grandparents, you know?
Well, I think you also mentioned the Schooling the World movie.
Yes.
Yes, which we'll be screening at RE this year. Thanks again for that tip too.
Yeah.
The Schooling the World, my takeaways were exactly what you just described about, the sort of westernization of local, international parochial environments. So trying to live on some standard, somebody else's standard that's deemed, quote unquote successful, when there's a big question of, at what price are you chasing these dreams? And, if you can't grow grain in an environment where it's a necessity, then you have not passed down a requisite skill if you continue to plan to live there. So with all these endeavors, it seems like, personal responsibility and awareness have to be really tied to that. So, right. Mm-hmm. It's like me saying I'm signing myself up to be a doctor in some thing or a lawyer, and I'm going to have X and Y as a result, without really doing the research too, as to how many hundred thousands of lawyers are there? Is there really a need for my particular specialty in my area? Much less learning something that's more important in another country.
Right.
It seems like a fallacy.
Right.
So I'm really excited to watch that movie and learn more about that.
Yeah, it's really, really an important topic because education is seen as a panacea. Like nobody would argue with like, oh, well, we're providing education for, these people in these remote areas of the world. And everybody goes, oh, that's great. Thumbs up, but there are responsible ways and there are irresponsible ways to provide that education. And if the education strips them of their ability to relate to their environment and to their community and to their families, then it's a really bad thing that we're doing. And trying to be a little bit more critical about how it's a kind of colonialism, and it's a kind of sanctioned colonialism that our culture embraces and is like, yeah, go for it. But it's still a form of colonialism. And thankfully, there are people out there doing work to counteract it. Manish Jain is a friend of mine. He was at the Giftable conference I mentioned earlier, and he started a university in Rajasthan in India to undo some of the damage, to de-school people and to help them relate better to their communities and to their environment, to learn from the grandparents, to have respect for these old ways of being and learning. And he's doing really good work and really raising the, ringing the bell for this. And he's in that movie. And it's really important. So.
Well, I'm excited to watch it. I work in the internet, in the computer world, and for some of my profession, and it's not uncommon to hear the term, offshore pricing or international pricing, and countries like India or others that have a high degree of talented computer programmers that are selling their time, their wage or their rate at less than the U.S. standard, are very appealing, especially for which I imagine confuses that conversation a little bit, right? Because you could theoretically go to school in India in relatively the same environment as this gentleman, and learn computer programming if that's what the Western world is desiring, and then sell it back to the Western world. Now it's at what would be considered a wholesale rate, but it's got to be confusing because, one person on one corner doesn't have fundamental life skills and maybe they're not employed in that. And then the next person could be, right? I get where that can be tricky.
Right. And I think that we also have to examine like how many more people do we need to be successful in the world destroying machine. Like, I mean, it's like we need people who are going to be doing regenerative agriculture and planting trees and saving water systems and protecting wildlife and working in communities to protect rainwater and in the soils. Like, this is the work. Those are the heroes to me. And I think that we're in this space where we're beginning to say, like, we're training people for this old story, but there's this new story emerging. And education is really geared towards the old story. And that's why rethinking it is so important. It's like, okay, so this is what's important today, is like this market economy that's like, that's eating up resources, but what's going to be really important in 20 years, Right. And when, we're at, 600 parts per million carbon in the atmosphere, and the Antarctic ice sheet has broken away, and we have, all these different things, the environment's completely changed. How are our priorities going to change? And no matter how it comes down the pike, our priorities are going to change.
I'm sorry. There's a conversation about this work-life balance thing, because, until the baseline needs are met, reminds me of like Maslow and hierarchy of needs. Until I know I've got food, shelter, love, whatever else I need, next thing's next, but first things first. So, right. And, I understand that. I can relate to that. And that's why this topic comes up so much in the rethinking environment, because people are saying, look, I'm trading up. In my opinion, up is progression, and up is the next story of my life. So if my next chapter is to, let's just say step one is to do work that feels more fulfilling. Okay, so now I'm doing work that's more fulfilling, but I've traded what used to be, I'll trade time for money, to I want to do something more fulfilling. Well, if I haven't yet learned how to make a living in the more fulfilling space, then I'm kind of stuck there for a while until I resolve that chapter before I can escalate up Maslow's hierarchy, right? Right. Before I'm doing something good for somebody else, I need to kind of make sure my baseline needs are met. And I'm not saying that is exactly what's happening, but I feel like with the vast majority, until baseline needs are met, they're not the majority, but for a lot of people, they're focused on that. And once those needs are met, then they can start thinking about the next thing. Unless those two stories weave together, like having needs met and do something better, or right. Maybe it's do something better and your needs will be met, depending right. on what your spiritual focus is, and Right.
And in countries like India, though the hierarchy, the Maslow's hierarchy, they're met within the community. They're fed. There's ample food. The houses are beautiful and well built, and there's a community around them that full of tradition, and their needs for community love, food, nurturing, it's all met. It's only when they get pulled out of that community and thrust into the urban environments of, say, Bombay, and they go to school, or they go to school part-time, and they don't get a job, and then they can't get home, they're living, and then there's like slum living, and they get trapped into this system yep. of trying to earn a living, but there not being enough money or jobs to provide them for them. And that's yet another reason you're saying people getting their needs met is to keep people into these local communities, have learning and education and literacy be part of the learning that happens in place, rather than taking them to a boarding school from their little remote village to Bombay and having them learn there, stripping them away from community. And I think we tend to think of, I'm not saying that's what you were thinking, but that people aren't getting their needs met in right. these small villages, but they are. And, we are poorer. And I really, at this point in my life, want to go to them as a supplicant and say, teach me how to live this way, because you are richer than I am. You have the things I'm looking for. You have people, everybody's story, you have all the food you can eat. And, I think that that's a remarkable way to live, and honoring people who live like that, and knowing that they're the ones that are going to teach us how to learn to live this way in the future. I think that's a really important part of the story.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't want to misspeak and give that impression.
No.
I think, but
I just went off on a tangent.
No, that's okay. You've got several points I would love to jump in on. I don't want to tie you up on it. I do. I think that sometimes in the States here, it feels a little bit like, we're some folks seem to feel like everything short of self-actualization should be provided. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of the sort of entitled to that general state without the responsibility that's required to actually go get it, do it have it be it, and then what sort of mess are you leaving in your wake? You know, we live in Florida, and there's a large retirement population, and you know, when we're traveling around, it's not uncommon to be around folks that, you know, their energy seems to be saying, wait a minute, I, you know, was sold a bill of goods. I bought into some program that sort of more or less assured me of something happier than what I'm living. And you don't have to go far to see that story playing out. Like,
right.
You know, some sour dispositions over the story that didn't fulfill the way it was supposed to.
Right.
And then there's a lot of happiness too. People that are just, but you know, you definitely see both versions of it down here.
Yeah. My dad and his wife live down in Florida, so we come once every couple of years. We come and spend a few weeks over Christmas, but so we see a lot of those people. And there really is. It's an amazing to see how, like, people at the, you know, it's sort of not at the end of their lives. A lot of these people are living 20 and 30 years down there and making whole second lives. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people have, you know, invested in the market in 2000, 2005, you know, and lost almost everything, and are having to, and have an expectation of how they wanted to live and how they should be living. But it's now, they were wealthy on paper, and then it all disappeared.
These incidents that you're talking about, like you mentioned earlier, they seem to be happening faster and faster now, which is indicative of the story changing more rapidly, right?
Right.
You know, it was however many decades ago since the Depression, you know, 100 years ago, give or take. And then we've got, you know, between the 87, the Wall Street drop, and then the tech crash, and then the real estate bubble, and, you know,
right.
And it's just...
There are bank runs in Greece today. So, like, I mean, it's, you know, it's starting to happen again, but this time in the euro.
Right.
So yeah,
which has been predicted for a while. So
it has been, and you know, people need to pay attention to what's happening there, because the austerity that was imposed. I mean, I have a special place in my heart for Greece. I went there every year for like 10 years to work, and the austerity that was imposed on Greece was just unbelievably hard on the population. You know, 50% of the young people are unemployed. There's homelessness for the first time in a country where figs and fruit grow on trees wild in the countryside. People are starving to death, and it's a punishment that is really, really remarkable. And I, you know, Greece is damned if they do and damned if they don't at this point. But I don't know. This week is going to be really interesting to see how it plays out.
Well, Marie, I really appreciate the time you've given us today and all the different nuggets you've given us to think about. I'm going to be very excited to get to know you better and spend more time with you at Rethinking Everything 2015. By the way, folks, I didn't mention it before, but September 4th through 7th in Little Rock, Arkansas. Marie Goodwin will be there. Charles Eisenstein will be there. A number of other speakers who we're going to roll out in interviews just like this. But I think we accomplished today's mission was to get to know Marie a little bit better and understand what's going on in your world. So
yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. My sincere pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye.